Well, let's get started. Good morning. My name is Henrietta Wiggins, and I am the Vice Chair of the Tri-County School Chapter. I would like to welcome everyone to today's virtual workshop, Unconscious Bias, a major leadership blind spot in your small business operation. Today's workshop is the final part of our five-part Women's Small Business Virtual Workshop series. Just a little bit about SCORE. SCORE is a national nonprofit organization with 350 chapters and over 13,000 members throughout the United States. SCORE is dedicated to helping small businesses start, grow, and to succeed. We are a resource partner of the Small Business Administration. In collaboration with the following SCORE chapters, Tri-County, Bucks County, Westchester, and Delaware counties, we service all small business owners and entrepreneurs throughout our counties. Our chapters are made up from members with experience in all areas of business. We offer free mentoring service as well as educational seminars and workshops. Please use the Q&A today and the chat feature to log in your questions. Our moderator will address them accordingly. Today's workshop will be recorded and all PowerPoint slides will be emailed to you at the close of this event. Our speakers today will be Adrienne Turner and Major Benjamin Brooks. Good morning, Adrienne and Major Ben. It
Good
is a
morning.
pleasure. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to have you here today with us. So let's get started. I would like to introduce Adrienne Turner. She is the owner of Turner Coaching, Training, and Consulting, LLC, a nationally certified minority-owned business enterprise. She has coached and trained more than 9,000 professionals across various industries since launching her company in 2016. She is the author of Fit for Success, Fearless, Inspired, Transform, and Success. Adrienne enjoys her role as an adjunct professor for business at Alvernia and Widener Universities, where she teaches economics, entrepreneurship, and leadership courses. She is the producer and the host of Fit for Women TV, which airs on Berks Community Media. Some of Adrienne's community awards include the 2020 Alvernia University Bernadine Legacy Award, the 2019 Best of Reading Award for Coaching, the 2018 Miss Pennsylvania America Leadership Award, the 2018 YMCA Tri-County Exceptional Women Shooting Star Awards, and many, many other. Adrienne believes everything is possible, anything is possible, and that you can create the life you desire. She shares her experiences to inspire others to overcome obstacles to make their dreams reality. When we kicked off this series, we had the pleasure of having Adrienne be our moderator. And now that we're closing our series, she's back again. Welcome, Adrienne. It's all yours.
Thank you, Henrietta. And that introduction is longer than anything that I will say from here forward. I really appreciate that. It is a pleasure, it's an honor to be associated with SCORE and to be the person introducing our speaker. I'm just going to reiterate that we encourage your participation. So you can begin now by introducing yourself through the chat function, the name of your company, and your motivation for joining today. We're going to learn some key skills on leveraging and appreciating diversity to increase your personal and business success. And who's going to help us do that? That's Major Benjamin Brooks. So we invite you to use the chat function and Q&A, and I'm going to introduce Major right now. He is a retired major of the Pennsylvania State Police, management consultant, and founder of Major Ben's Consulting Agency, specializing in providing assistance to custom companies to more effectively implement their cultural diversity programs. Specific areas of expertise include diversity, inclusion, with a strong emphasis on the impact of unconscious bias, a major leadership blind spot. His website is www.majorben.com. And Major Ben, we welcome you to begin your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. When a zebra is born, the first 15 minutes of its life are critical to its survival. It is the period of time that that baby must imprint on its mother's stripes. We know that each zebra stripe is as individual as our fingerprints, but during that 15-minute period of time, if there are no interruptions, that baby will always be able to identify the mother and the mother, the child. However, if for any reason there are any interruptions at all, that mother will reject that child and it will be stomped to death by the herd. What is important then to look at that and begin to realize that that baby's life is really impacted by the first 15 minutes of its life. Every blind spot decision that's made from there on will be based on instinct. Contrast that to human beings. Psychologists tell us that between the age of 0 and 6 is when the basic personality of a child is formed. Most of the learning takes place during that time because of imitation or emulation. And after that, it is a reinforcement of those learned behaviors. Unlike the zebra, humans then benefit from the interruptions because now we can be able to identify our blind spots through education as well as training. Today, I want to spend a little time talking to you about leadership's blind spots as an aspect of diversity, inclusion, and bias, and how this impacts your business survival. I'm not going to teach you anything today, but I just want to interrupt your thought patterns to introduce another concept. This session is all about you because this is where the rubber meets the road. Now, as we go along today, I don't want you to try to remember everything I say, but I want you to think about how you feel as a result of what's being said. To that end, then, now, what is it that we're going to be talking about this morning? Let's take a quick look here. We're going to be talking about leadership's blind spots and how that impacts your business. All right. Now, at the end of the session,
don't see your slides, Major Ben.
You don't see my. Oh, okay. Let me go back. Oh. Oh, we'll go back to share again. Oh, well, I missed it there. Oh, Lord.
You want to first share, hit the share.
Let me go back.
Okay, it appears he's back.
Okay, share screen again. I lost it on the. Let me go back here. Pull it back up. Okay. Hmm.
So we see your screen now, but we don't see your presentation.
Okay.
Now we see the presentation. You just put it in slideshow mode and we're ready to go.
Okay. All right.
Fantastic.
Okay.
And you've got someone who is encouraging you. See, that's really good. They said, Major Ben, we all struggle with this technology.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think is important then, this is an indicative of what happens in our business. You know, there is that slight interruption because it talks about what diversity is really all about. Now, so to that end, then we're going to be talking about how do we define blind spots, identify foundational principles of leadership's blind spots, and how it impacts what we do. The origin of blind spots, you know, because I think right now we really need to know where these things came from, and then talk about the biggest blind spot that we have, that is unconscious bias, and talk about how this bias then impacts our decision making. And at the end, we'll talk about strategies for reducing those blind spots. And I think that's very important. All right, now, before we move further, then, I believe that in order to do anything in life, there has to be foundational principles that we need to look at, because it's almost like if you cannot build a house by building the roof first. If you don't have a foundation, nothing is going to happen. And I think as we look at this business here, then, is to talk about how critical foundational principles are to clearly understand how all of this stuff relates to your business and your business success. And the first thing we talk about here, we say about attitude. Zig Ziglar said it is your attitude, not your aptitude, which will determine your altitude, which means then that it doesn't matter how smart you think you may be. Without a positive attitude, it's not going to happen in your business. And by the way, we choose the attitude that we want every single day. When you wake up in the morning, you choose that attitude. And every single thing that you do during the course of the day then is impacted by that particular attitude, you know, and it impacts your connection with all people there. And as we say, and then we look at this and how this deal with people. What business are we in? You know, some people say, well, we're in the business of sales. No, you're in the people business. Now, in terms of attitude, go back. Carnegie Institute did a study some years ago, and they discovered that 15% of the success that you enjoy in business involves your mental attitude and your technical skills. 85% of how well you deal with and manage people. That's very interesting. Now, I started looking at this and thinking about how does impact business. And we think about this for a minute. If 15% of our success involve technical skills and mental ability, the question you ask you as business owners then, how much time do you think percentage-wise we spend to make sure that 15% is squared away? All right. The prevailing wisdom is about 80%. And think about this. If you spend 80% of your time on what gives you 15% success, somewhere along there is a mismatch there someplace there. Because the question is asked you right now, what is it in your business then that keeps you awake at night? Is it the computers? Or is it the structure, the cars, whatever? No, you probably say it's people. And if it's people, how much time percentage-wise do we have to deal with those issues there? 20%, which is a recipe for business disaster. Now, we say, and by the way, as we talk about this is business owner, this is really all about you. And we say in your business, your attitudes are contagious. Ask yourself, is yours worth catching? Then we move on to we call reaction versus response. This is where many people get crossed up. We react when we don't know what to do. We respond, however, when we have full knowledge. For example, you cannot swim. You're sitting by the pool and your 2-year-old child falls into the pool. What are you likely to do? And most folks will say, well, jump in, and what's going to happen? You both are going to drown. But if you understand CPR, first aid, how to swim, no big deal. Every time you react, you get in trouble. Go back in your life, particularly where something has gone wrong, you will find that more than likely it occurred because you reacted as opposed to responding. What I want to do is get you in the response mode, if you will. If you think about what's happening on the national scene right now, there is a tremendous amount of reaction. And you see right now, we are in deep trouble because we have not gotten to the point of being able to respond. When you came to the session this morning, each of you came in with a toolbox. Not actually, but perceptually. And in that box were all of the tools that you've needed to do your jobs as effectively or as efficiently as you have been able to do it today. What we want to do this morning is to add to that toolbox. Abraham Maslow once said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then everything will look like a nail. Think about that. Think about all the stuff that's going around you, and look at many businesses, who really do not embrace this whole notion of diversity and inclusion because they don't see it as being that very vital to their business. Economics. Economics is it's not always about but money. It's about decisions. And think about blind spot decisions that sometimes we may make that impact our business ability to do our business through lawsuits or complaints or grievances and things like this. These are things that are very, very important for us to take a look at. And then we talk about safety. Now, many folks would say, we talk about safety, we think, well, like the doors are locked and the windows are closed. And no, we want to talk about emotional safety. What's that really all about? The kind of safety where your employees can say to you, Adrian, let me tell you how that comment you made about diversity the other day impacted me. Why is that so important? It's important because from the perspective of your employees, and by the way, everything we talk about this morning, not only does it impact your workplace, but it also impacts your home because the principles apply across the board. And the whole idea here is that we understand that every human being has a strong wish or desire to be heard and have their needs met. Now, if I can tell you how what you did impacted me, what I have to be careful of there, because if I start accusing you of doing some things, hearing shuts down, you become defensive. And the moment you become defensive, hearing shuts down and nothing else happens. But if I can absorb some of the blame here by saying, let me tell you how it impacted me, it sets you up so you're able to hear what I'm going to be saying. In business, then, you really have to be able to have people hear you, because because the whole idea here is how do you make that connection? Now, I think I skipped one up here, and that was empathy. Empathy is the most important word in the English language, most powerful in the English language. What it means then is going over to the other side of the table to see what it looks like from that person's perspective. How do you feel about your customers? How do you feel about your family? I believe that in this business, if you have to walk a mile in my shoes to understand what corns or bunions feel like. If you cannot make an emotional connection with the people you're trying to impact or influence, we really, really miss the boat. So as we look at those foundational principles, and I got a lot out of order for a minute there, but the idea is that no matter what order we put them in, if those principles can be inculcated into your psyche, it gives you a heads up or a leg up on the other folks in your business. And by the way, some people will say, well, I want to do something, that's going to, because I'm going to be competing with other folks out here. In your business, when you want to compete with everyone else, you only want to be as good as them. The question is, what is it that's going to distinguish you from the rest of the pack? And that's going to be very important. Okay, now, one of the things we talk about here and talk about blind spots, what are blind spots? Blind spots is that the information that you have as opposed to the information that you need to know. As we talk about this session being all about you, think about this as individuals. There are four different perspectives that we think about when we think about you and looking at the blind spots. The one perspective is that your employees or your family know a lot about you because you share information about you. So there's a mutual exchange of information there. But there's another aspect is that there's information that only you know about yourself that you don't share with other people unless it's on a case-by-case basis. But then there's one perspective there where things you don't know about yourself and neither other anybody else. And the only way that can happen is through psychoanalysis. But the idea here then is the one part in that quadrant that really impacts you. And we say, we call blind spot. What is that really all about? Blind spot has to do with you have people around you, whether it's employees or family, and there are things that they know about you that you don't know about yourself. For example, you're walking around with lettuce in your teeth. Now, everybody can see that, or toilet paper on the issue. Everybody can see that, but you're totally oblivious. Now, unless someone clues you in, that's really going to be kind of tough for you, because the question is right now, can you walk into a boardroom with that without somebody telling you what's going on? No. And what happens with blind spots is that sometimes we have people who are close to us who will not level with us to tell us about our blind spots. I call it sycophantic following, and that is, people they will tell you what you want to know as opposed to what you want to hear, as opposed to what you want to know. You have to have people around you who will tell you the truth. You have seen this manifested right now on the world stage, how people have not shared those blind spots, and it creates so much chaos. Now, if you notice, I have this picture here of a mirror. And I think this is a metaphor then for how blind spots work. I happen to go to a class on AARP on driving. Now, you ask yourself, well, wait a minute, you're a state trooper. Why are you going to a class on driving? Well, I went because I wanted to see what kind of things they were talking about, because I said, maybe one of these days I would like to be a driver, teach driver's ed or whatever. So I went there, and one of the most salient points that he made there was that when you drive your vehicle, on each side of your car, everyone has a mirror. And as you set those mirrors, that you can see from this picture here, what that mirror then shows, it shows the side of the vehicle. What that says to in life is that you have people then who are around you who will be able to mirror what you want them to share with you. But he said that when you see the side of the vehicle, that is really a blind spot. Wow, that was eye-opening. So he said, but what I want you to do then, I want you just to turn that mirror just a little bit to the point where you don't see the side of your vehicle. And we did that, and they're like, wow. Now, what we talk about then is that we made that adjustment. In life, then, what you have to do right now, when someone in your organization comes to you and tells you about a blind spot, what it means then that you have to be able to make that slight adjustment. Because as we made that adjustment, this is what it looked like. Wow. Now, let's take a look at then in real life. I was driving for Uber for a while. And I found myself, with the mirrors and stuff, driving around, and it was just nerve-wracking because at the end of the day, my stress was unbelievable. My visual acuity was all messed up, and I was at the chiropractor almost every week. But then when I started to adjust those mirrors as according to what the guy said, and I made that slight adjustment, I was able to drive in the middle of heavy traffic in New York City and not have any kind of those ill effects at all. So what I'm saying to you then, as we go along today, as we talk about the bias and how this whole thing impact you, all we're asking you to do in your business then is to be able to make those slight adjustments so that you can see your business in a much broader frame, if you will. Think about how, look at, as that song say, I can see clearly now, very important. Now, so that gets us down to the meat for this morning. Organizational blind spots. Now, we think about diversity and blind spots, and people say, well, what's diversity? Diversity is about, making sure we have blacks and whites in the organization. That's very, very important. And we talk about inclusion, and we got all these people in here, so we do have inclusion. But inclusion really means then that not only are you in there, but you have a seat at the table, and you're able to participate in your business. The same thing. It has to be very important there. Now, we talk about this whole notion right now. We talk about unconscious bias. It's a learned stereotype. Now, where do biases come from? Remember, we said before, between the ages 0 and 6 is when the basic personality is formed, and all of that learning takes place down there. Everything that has ever come into your brain, is stored in your brain in some area back here. Very, very important. Folks will say, well, I am the least biased person that you can think of. Well, if you are the least biased person you can think of, then you are dead, because bias is how we have been able to live. Go back to the nomadic days. And Ledoux called it a safety factor. Nomadic days. We have tribes in a particular area. And everybody in that tribe, they all look alike and they behave alike, and there's a comfort level there. But sometimes there is an encroachment of another tribe. And when that happens, there is the perception that you're going to take something from them, you will steal their property, or maybe kill somebody, and that becomes problematic. And so the idea here is to think about bias is not good or bad. It just is. The question is, and how do we understand it? And how do we apply it in our business to make us more successful? Like a lot of folks say, well, I don't want to hear all about this bias. I think right now, if you're in business, you really got to understand, how important these basic principles are. Now, take a look at this. We talk about bias in terms of, on the one hand, we say bias of fear, trepidation, or dehumanization. On the other hand, we got bias of comfort, acceptance, and humanization. Let's go through this for a moment, if you will, and talk about fear, trepidation, and dehumanization. May 25th, 2020, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the world witnessed the most horrific major blind spot decision by Officer Derek Chauvin. You had a ringside seat. The world had a ringside seat, because all of a sudden, this whole notion of bias was dropped into your laps. And as we watched Officer Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd's neck, and as we watched the life oozing from his body, and the officer was glaring at the camera as though he was at a picnic or reenacting a scene. Bias, fear, trepidation, dehumanization. And it is all was because he was arrested for a $20 counterfeit bill. Contrast that with Dylan Roof, a young white male who went to a house of worship in Charleston, South Carolina, walked into the church and he was welcomed with open arms. And he sat with those parishioners for over an hour worshiping. And all of a sudden, he takes out a gun and he kills 9 people in cold blood. The officer's bullet went out and says, "Young man, armed and dangerous." He was apprehended sometimes later without incident. And it was subsequently taken to Burger King for a meal. Bias of comfort, acceptance, humanization. What are your feelings? How do you relate to George Floyd? How does George Floyd incident relate to your business? Many times in our business, we have our knee on the necks of our employees, our customers. We have our fear, and we have that dehumanization thing going on and with unbeknownst to many of us. It's really important. And go back over to the other side and think about with Dylan Roof. How do you feel about what happened with him as compared to George Floyd? Those are things, ladies and gentlemen, that we really have to take a good, hard look at. Because think about George Floyd. From an economic perspective, that one blind spot decision cost that city upwards to $500 million in damage because of that blind spot decision by that officer. Can your business sustain that kind of situation? In your business, sometimes in the business world, we say that because of blind spot decisions, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $450 billion that are lost through disengagement as a result of bias in our workplaces. Now, so we say here, bias plus prejudice plus stereotypes equals discrimination, and we're talking about profiling. And along with that, in terms of our blind spots, we know that in business, in women-owned business, for example, we know that right now, what you have at your disposal out there, from a diversity perspective, all those minorities, you have access to a $3.9 trillion buying group out there. 85% of business decisions are impacted by women. Think about how you get your share, your piece of the pie, and think about how bias then can interrupt that business of being able to enjoy those lofty benefits. And that's going to be very, very important. Now, let's bring it down a little simpler. Now, that was very dramatic as we talk about those two situations, but think about this in your business. Fear, trepidation, and dehumanization. Black female walks into your store. What happens? The unconscious bias then forces us to, from the time they walk in, to follow that individual throughout the store. We don't realize the impact of that, but the person who's been impacted really knows what's going on. And contrast that to that white customer who comes in, has the run of the store, no big deal. When it's time to help them, you're there. We talk about this whole idea then about bias, and well, how do I get beyond that? Quite simply, when you deal with people, then deal with them on the basis of performance or behavior. Because if you do it that way, then you don't get into the business of really having bias impact you in a negative way. And that's going to be very, very important for you.
Major Brooks, can I
Yes, ma'am.
add that the way that shows up is, if you have that bias, then that person that you follow around the store might not decide to shop there. So you lose business. That's the connection.
Exactly. And we sometimes we tend to forget. And so the person will say, well, I'm not a biased person, and I don't have that, So the question we ask yourself right now is that, and how does this biases show up then in some of the most unusual situations, between the stress or whatever, and that becomes very, very critical. And so we say sometimes folks will make comments in a biased way, and they'll say, "Oops, oh my God, I didn't mean to say that. Where did that come from? It was there. What is the likelihood that any of you would wake up tomorrow morning and speak perfect Arabic if it never was there?" And so that's the power of blind spots. Now, abstract words, which was very, very important. Said words create pictures. We say such things as Black Lives Matter. Wow. What's the picture? Well, the picture then, and many people, a bunch of rogues running around, all right? Pictures create emotion. What's the emotion? Oh my God, we have a fear that, oh my God, they're going to do something because they're just a very radical group or whatever. And the emotion then create action, and we're going to find ways to stymie these people. And because this is not what we were about. And then, of course, action create behavior. And that behavior then is we are going to make sure that we find ways to curtail that activity, because we really don't understand what that's really all about. Now, as we talk about this whole thing about words, and we talk about how the picture that we have. And I was in a session one day, and so we talked about words like Black Lives Matter. And so the lady says to me, she said, well, I think all lives matter. And I can agree with that. But the idea then, so you ask yourself then, why are we talking about Black lives mattering? It's because they never did. If you go back and look at every law involving Black people inclusion we talk about, it has something to do with the fact that we were not being heard, our needs did not be met, we were not at the table. And that was very, 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 very important. Okay. Now, in terms of that then, and so you say in Black Lives Matter, 1925, Black Wall Street, birthing in community. They had fabulous stores, theaters, grocery stores, banks, and all kinds of stuff. And it was a picture community. And one day, someone had a comment about one of the Black guys had said something to a white woman, and all of a sudden, the white mob descended on this town, and they burned that town to the ground. And they killed over 300 people. To date, nobody has been arrested. Did those Black lives matter? Did those young girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church, did their lives matter? And so the idea here is, when you understand what the movement's really all about and how that whole thing impacts your business, it gives us a whole different perspective of what this is really all about. Okay, now, blind spots that impact recruiting and retention in your businesses. Conformity bias. You hire people in your company, and we have this company norms. And we sometimes say that, but particularly when it comes to dealing with minorities, well, that person really is not a good fit because they don't do all the things that we do. that person who comes in who may bring the lunch in, which is different than what everybody has been accustomed to, that becomes problematic. That person dresses differently than the normal folks. That becomes a situation that begins to impact our ability in dealing with this also. And the whole idea, as long as folks are conforming, that's fine. If you think about today, as we think about the division in this country, how that conformity thing, how powerful that conformity thing really is. And the idea here, if you think about your business and think about in terms of that $3.9 trillion that is out there that you're trying to garner in. Beauty bias. Now this is one that hits business like you would not believe. I remember way back when one of the big companies had a situation where there was a young lady in there, the first when the dreadlocks first came out. And of course, there was a lawsuit on the basis of her filing a lawsuit because they didn't think that dreads were compatible with their particular business. And so we finally got beyond that. We sometimes subconsciously use those things against people, that always look like us. And so the idea here is to be very much aware of beauty bias. And beauty bias can come in many forms, be tall, short, heavy, thin, or whatever that case may be. Then we talk about affinity bias. In diversity, and we have this term called homogeneous clustering. Birds of a feather flock together. And that is people who have similar ideas, whatever, they're always coming together. In organizations, there are different affinity groups. There may be Black affinity groups, there may be LGBTQ affinity groups, white affinity groups. And what happens, these groups come together because they begin to validate themselves. The more people are able to validate themselves within the organizational structure, the easier it is going to be able to connect with the other folks within that business. And so we must embrace those affinity groups, because again, particularly when we say that our people are our most valued asset, if they are, then value what they bring to the table. Similarity bias. We tend to hire people who kind of relate to us. That person, they have to be things are close to us. Now, if those things are not compatible with where we are, sometimes we tend to not bring that person in. What we find, however, is that we lose the treasure of the quality employee when we begin to make those decisions based on these different type biases, as opposed to dealing with on the performance or behavior. All right, confirmation bias. This is one that really gets me going, and I think here many people can identify with this. I find that as we talked very early on about attitudes, confirmation bias plays out very dramatically in that. When a person comes in and they have been at another company or another section, and they have been labeled with the idea of a bad attitude. When that person comes to you, then you, instead of dealing with that person on the basis of what they bring to the table, you on the basis of what you've heard about them. And if there's anything that you've heard comes out in that person's behavior, I am sure that, but they said he had a bad attitude over there, had a bad attitude over here. Now it's confirmed. Here's the problem with that. An attitude is anything that's in back of the eyeball. It cannot be measured. What we're concerned about then is the behavior that's manifested as a result of the particular attitude that we choose. So then, if you can describe that in behavioral terms, then you're okay. But if you can't describe it in behavioral terms, that becomes very, very problematic. So we need to pay attention to that. Attribution bias. Attribution bias is that we attribute certain characteristics to certain groups. Well, you must play basketball because you're tall. You must be smart in math because you're Asian. You must be able to dance because you're African American. No. Take a look at that. Does that hold true to that? No. begin to take a look at how we begin to make those decisions. Contrast effect of bias. Right now, Adrian, I really like you, but you're kind of different from Henrietta. And I don't know what it is. And we play that game. When I came in the state police, there's three of us. I was in the station in Reading, and my other buddies were stationed in Lancaster. And folks they play this game. Well, Ben, you're okay, but that Ron Sharp, I get it. And we played it. And sometimes they want us to buy into that, and we have to be very careful about being able to buy into that. And as people who are in the business of leadership, make sure we don't fall prey to that kind of stuff, because it becomes very, very problematic. Then we talk about the halo effect. And that halo effect is interesting here, because it's like, I'm going to deal with you on the basis of my familiarity with you. And one of the things that happens here is that if you have an African American in a position, there is this perception that they're going to do special favors to other African Americans simply because they are African Americans. And we began to deal with people on the basis of, like, I remember I was at the academy, and the sergeant said to me, he said to me, if you guys on the job, if you got promoted, do you think you could overcome the halo effect? And I was like, what, are you kidding me? But you never asked the white guys that. So why is it that I am always going to be able to defer to people who look like me simply because they look like me? No, why can't I deal with them on the basis of their performance or behavior? And that's important. And we talk about the horn effect, because we've heard some negative things about somebody, and we begin to make decisions based on what we have heard. And that's very important. I remember this talk, there's a guy named Charlie. I was doing some work with PennDOT and on sexual harassment, and up in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. And so we were doing a session, and so the people said to us, the session went good okay today, but tomorrow it's going to be tough because you're going to have Charlie in it. So what's Charlie? And they described Charlie, and the way they described Charlie, I spent all week at night. I wake at night and, oh my God, what I'm getting into tomorrow. So the next one we come in, and I'm at the board doing things at the board, and I turned around and I see this white male sitting there, blonde hair, string of hair, earrings, tattoos, muscle shirt, piercing blue eyes, steered straight ahead. And I said, oh my God, that must be Charlie. So we started talking, and we started asking people to talk something about themselves. And Charlie was in the military. And so I started a conversation with Charlie. I said, Charlie, let me ask you something. You were in the military. Yes, it was. And we started talking about, how do you feel about veterans and all? And Charlie started talking. And I started asking him about the memorial in Washington. And he started to talk. Right now, Charlie went from holding his arms, and I'm looking at Charlie. If I were to deal with Charlie on the basis of what they told me, I would have been off base, but I allowed Charlie to be, because Charlie wanted to be heard and have his name back. And so he went from having his arms folded to full participation. As a matter of fact, he monopolized my breaks and everything else at the end of the day. So the people asked me at the end of the day, how was Charlie? Charlie was wonderful. What do you mean? See, what they thought that I was going to deal with Charlie on the basis of what they had said about him, and that was not where it is. So the idea here is then be very careful about how we make those decisions, because those decisions really have a definite impact on our operation. Okay, now, strategies to overcome that. Recognize that you have biases and own it. Yes, I do have biases. Do I have biases? Yes, I have biases, and you got to own them. I remember I took my car to a dealership because there was a noise, and when I drove in, there's a young lady there, and she said, "Can I help you?" And I was explaining what happened, and across from her was a male sitting behind the desk. Now I'm talking to her, explaining what happened, but I'm looking at the male. Wow. So then she said to him, "Well, take the car out. See if you can spot the noise." But the guy went with me. So we were riding out, and then it dawned on me as he's riding, I started laughing. He said, "What's the matter?" I said, I teach this stuff, and yet I walked in and I found myself doing the same thing. And so I asked him, I said, "Well, how long have you worked on?" He had been only working there for about a couple of weeks. Wow, can we make those? Now, do I own that? Sure, I own that, because I come in there and all of a sudden I'm talking to her, but I'm looking at him because my mental programming then has always been the male is going to be the person with the answer, when I'm ignoring what the answers really are over here. Listen and ask for feedback. People who are going to tell you what you need to know, but you got to listen to them. When you have folks who are telling you what you want to hear, see, you have to have people who are going to tell the emperor he or she has no clothes, and make sure you understand the feedback. You got lettuce in your teeth. What that mean? You got to take it out. You got toilet paper in the shoes. You got to take it out. If you're using biased language out here, you've got to check yourself to make sure that doesn't happen. Create an atmosphere where people are able to level with you. The idea here is then, as we talk about emotional safety, if people don't feel emotionally safe to share with you, that's really going to be problematic. Think about your children. We have this notion that children should be seen and not heard. So we subscribe to that. Now, all of a sudden, then you have company coming around and that child just blurts something out. You go like, oh my God, So you're embarrassed. Why you're embarrassed? Because you see that child was never able to express themselves, but all of a sudden it comes out in the most inopportune time. Develop the capacity to use a flashlight on yourself. Take a good look at the end of the day. What have I said or what have I done that allowed bias to creep into my conversations or creep into my decisions? Is there something that I really need to look at? And the last here is said that explore awkwardness and discomfort. This stuff is not easy, ladies and gentlemen. It is going to make you uncomfortable. Remember this: if that grain of sand was never put in that oyster, you would never ever have a pearl. That awkwardness then means, we talked about complaints. In this business, when people are complaining, filing lawsuits and things like this, don't panic. Sometimes it is the easiest documentation you can have because they are telling you up front what is happening. The idea then, you must be able to listen to what they're saying. Now, what does that bring us to then? It brings us to here. In 1980, there was an eruption volcano at Mount St. Helens. It was the first eruption in over 100 years, which means then that this thing was bubbling up for over 100 years. In America, then, this racism and biasing has been bubbling up for over 100 years. And it manifests itself here in the George Floyd. But in the 1980, then, at the bottom of that mountain was a guy by the name of Harry Truman. Not the president, Harry Randolph Truman, 83 years old, folk hero. He had been living at the bottom of the hill for about over 50 years or more. And when the seismologists and the geologists warned the folks, look, there's this impending explosion, you gotta evacuate. And so Mr. Truman said, I am not moving. I've been here for over 50 years and I am not moving. And when it erupted, Mr. Truman was history. Many of you have witnessed this recent volcano. You see the molten lava coming down the hill. Are you going to maintain your positions at the bottom of the hill, or are you going to make a slight adjustment? That's your choice. Questions? Comments?
Major Ben, excellent presentation. Thank you so much. We have one question, and you started to share a bit more as you proceeded through your presentation, but to provide and elaborate a little bit more on how disengagement relates to blind spots.
In many organizations, if you think, I think it's something like 60% of employees are disengaged in organizations. And they're disengaged in organizations because they have been saying things to management in one way or another that management has not paid attention to. It can come from absenteeism. It can come from slacking in your work, or just really not being an active participant. The idea here is then is to take a good look at your employees and find out, on a daily basis, and I think supervisors and managers are like parents, mothers particularly. See, a mother knows when that child is hungry, tired, sleepy, wet, whatever the case may be. Any change in the behavior, that mother is on it. That's the kind of vigilance that you must have with your employees. Because when you notice some things are not happening, talk to that employee. Because when you talk to that employee and they're able to hear you, then it eliminates that whole thing. And so, and the reason we talk about those foundational principles is because if you don't understand why things happen, it's going to continue. So being more vigilant with your employees then will give you a better perspective on where they are. Because if they can share with you for example, we tend to do performance appraisals. And we do performance appraisals maybe once a year. Now, think about that. If you are a casino owner checks his revenue 3 or 4 times a day because he wants to make sure that he is on track. As with your employees, you have to do periodic check-ins with your employees, because once you are checking in with your employees, first of all, they're engaged, they feel included and an integral part of the whole operation. And that makes a huge difference for you.
Fantastic. Do you have any particular strategies for entrepreneurs? A lot of SCORE members are those who are just starting out. So how might biases impact their work, their growth in entrepreneurism?
When you start on any business, again, it's like building a house. You got to start with the basics. And you see, and the basics never change, right? What do I need to know? The biggest issue you're going to have in your business has to deal with people. Think about that. When we talked about 85% of how well you deal with people, that's where it's all, because and the idea here is to recognize what kind of business you're in. I remember my friend Calvin Roberts, leader of our National Speakers Association, was talking about way back when people were on the railroads, and he said people were not doing well. And he said, "What business are you in?" And people said, "Well, we're in the railroad business." He said, "No. Railroad is what you do. You are in the people business. And if you're in the people business, you got to go about the business of clearly understanding people, because you can start your business. You can have all of this money, all this beautiful infrastructure, but if you don't have the kind of people that you need, you're going to go belly up. And so the most important thing that you have to deal with there is make sure that you clearly understand everything you possibly can about people and how to handle them. Like, for example, Les Giblin says there are 4 considerations we deal with people. He said, first of all, we're all egoists, which means that we all have an ego. And we know that the hungry ego is a mean ego. What does a junkyard dog? He has a heavy chain on him. In the worst condition, treat him like a dog. And we feed him the worst food, no wonder he bites. You've got to feed that hungry ego. And that goes for those leaders, because if you can get that ego intact, fine. And secondly, he says that we're all more interested in ourselves than anybody else. And that's true. That's true because you cannot really interact with me unless you know who you are. And thirdly, he says that, remember, everybody wants to feel as though they have a significant contribution to make. They want to find ways to make your business successful. Okay. And lastly, he says that we seek approval of others in order to approve of ourselves. And that sort of puts it all together. So when you're going into business, think about this. The most important part of that business is the people part.
Thank you very much, Major Ben. We are at 10:03, so we are over time. Let me see if I can't find my emoji to give you the hand clap. I'm not sure if SCORE will be coming back on to end the presentation, but I am certain that people walked away with great mindset strategies to be successful in understanding biases and the people part of what they experience. So thank you so much.
And I am here. It was a wonderful workshop today, and I agree. Both Adrian and Major Ben did a wonderful job. Adrian, we don't want to leave you out of this as well. Very thoughtful of a lot of things that Major Ben discussed today. Remember that this workshop is being recorded and the slides will be emailed to you. I would like to personally thank our speakers today, Adrian and Major Ben, for doing such an outstanding job, and to also give a special thanks to Charlie Morris, who is Bucks County SCORE mentor. He has provided us with exceptional technical support. This will be our last series of this event, so what a wonderful time we had. And I want to give a big thanks to Bucks County, Westchester, and Delaware counties for collaborating with Tri-County to put this effort on. We have had wonderful speakers and moderators throughout all 5 series, so special thanks to them and those of us who have registered for this event and all others. You can also find these events on YouTube. They have been recorded and they are in the YouTube files. Remember to find out about SCORE and how we can help you and your business. Please visit us at the information provided during this webinar. If you would like to become a SCORE mentor, volunteer, subject matter expert, or workshop presenter, please contact us. Thank you and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.